Good day, Internet. This is Chavez and Valko, the key to your immigration solutions. I am Senior Associate Ben Hamilton. And as you know, when you see my smiling face, we are here to talk about all things employment based immigration. If you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see we have a whole series covering every non immigrant visa category in detail, also, every employment based immigrant visa category, green card category in detail, right? Today, we're actually going to be adding to that list with a unique category that we just haven't discussed before called the International Entrepreneur Parole Rule. That's a mouthful. I think I'm just going to say IEP Rule because I know if I keep trying to say that, I am going to screw it up multiple times. Um, so, for starters, kind of like, what is this thing, right? Because it is not a non-immigrant visa and it's not a status. It's just kind of its own weird little unique thing. Basically what happened is the Obama administration, was looking for some new options for specific people. Now, normally it takes an act of Congress to create a new visa or status category. And of course, we know that when it comes to immigration, Congress has done virtually nothing for a very long time. Um, so this forced the Obama administration to kind of look at the existing framework and figure out, what existing thing can we kind of use to create something? And a classic example of that is DACA, right? Where that was done through sort of kind of an executive order to an actual sort of rule published by the Department of Homeland Security to kind of create this thing out of something else that was pre-existing. Such is the case here. What's the kind of general reason for its existence? Well, basically, this is aimed really at kind of the Silicon Valley and sort of the startup culture there. You're thinking of the type of people that have some great idea, but no money, right? So they're going out to venture capital firms, angel investors to get their money to fund the project. So it's very much geared at that. And it's also very much geared at people who don't qualify for the traditional investor visa. Remember, we have a whole video series on the E1s and the E2s, but one of the main points there is those are based on treaties, meaning it's only available to around 80, 90 countries. I mean, it varies between the E1 and the E2. So, for example, we do not have e-visa treaties with India or China. So, hey, talking to you guys, this is very much where the IEP rule can come into play. So, you're thinking of Silicon Valley startup culture, and especially people from places like India and China that may be involved in a startup. The IEP rule may apply to you. Um, so, what is this kind of born out of? Well, it's born out of parole, right? So, parole is this kind of thing that does exist in law, and it's kind of the thing that they were able to sort of take and tweak to fit their needs. So, parole allows someone to be physically present in the United States for a limited time period and a specific purpose, right? Based on a significant public benefit or urgent humanitarian rationale. So that's kind of, you can kind of think of, parole, how this has been used for like the people from Afghanistan. Or again, we see a lot of just the humanitarian rationale with people needing to come for severe medical issues or whatnot. So a person that's been paroled into the country, they have actually not been admitted, right? They remain as an applicant for admission even while paroled. So you're in this kind of limbo where it's not a status, right? Like if you came in as an H or an L, right? You're just paroled. It's kind of, we let you in, but you're not actually in a status, but you can stay. Um, so how did the IEP rule come about, right? So uh, the rule itself was finalized by DHS in 2017. But it's based on a 2014 executive action, right? And this, again, here's the kind of quotation, the basis of this whole thing. Entrepreneurs or startup entities whose entry into the United States would provide a significant public benefit through the substantial and demonstrated potential for rapid business growth and job creation. So remember, parole is significant public benefit or humanitarian rationale. They took that significant public benefit and they ran with it, right? That's the angle that they used to justify the creation of this rule. Now, the Trump administration did kind of try to put the kibosh on it, get rid of it. That didn't happen. It still exists, still on the books. still works. That's why we're talking about it. So, what are the basic requirements to apply for, under the IEP rule? Okay, so requirement one, that the individual possesses a substantial ownership interest in a startup entity created in the past 5 years in the United States that has a substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. So there's a lot of words in there that need to be defined. So what's a substantial ownership interest, right? It must be at least 10% at the time of adjudication of the initial parole request and at least 5% at the time a re-parole is adjudicated. So 10% minimum ownership in the company. That can be diminished over time. The ownership percentage can continue to be reduced through the re-parole period, but some ownership must be maintained. So it's like 10% initial, 5% on a reapplication, and then after that, it can even go down below 5%, but they have to maintain something. And that's kind of normal if you're bringing in more investment, that your shares over time will be reduced. But again, 10% on your initial application at minimum. Of course, what is a startup? It's formed within the 5 years immediately preceding the filing of the initial parole application and must have lawfully done business during any period of operation since its formation and must have, again, as always, substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. So, again, it can't be more than 5 years old, and it needs to show that it's been essentially doing business this whole time, right? So, requirement one, again, is about basically ownership and the age of the business. Requirement number two, that you have a central and active role in the startup entity such that they are well positioned to substantially assist with the growth and success of business. This term isn't like super defined in terms of what's a central and active role, but you're usually looking at like CEO, CTO, right? CFO, right? Or maybe you're playing a critical role in developing the technology. We see a lot of like people that are involved in like AI and machine learning and stuff like that. And it's like, maybe you're the one that's writing the code, right? Playing that very central role in the company, right? Now, so it can't be just, the janitor over there in the corner, right? It has to be, a central role. And again, we're talking about, a Silicon Valley tech startup, at least at its inception, is probably a pretty small team of people that are all, know the whatever the kind of like the tech is or something that they're using. Um, the next requirement, okay, this is the important one to sort of justify this existing under the parole criteria, is will provide a significant public benefit to the United States based on their role as an entrepreneur of the startup by showing that, right? So here's the things you have to show on the significant economic impact. There are three potential criteria. We'll go through the three and then break them down a little bit, right? So the startup entity has received a significant investment of capital from certain qualified U.S. investors with established records of successful investment, right? So significant capital investment in the company. Or the startup entity has received significant awards or grants for economic development, research and development, or job creation from federal, state, or local government entities that regularly provide such awards or grants. The third one is actually just says that you can combine the two. So they partially meet either or both of the previous two requirements and provide additional reliable and compelling evidence of the startup entity's substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation, right? So again, this outside investment, we can have government investment, or it can be a mix of the two, either or. So what is a qualified investment? So an investment made in good faith of lawfully derived capital. So again, they always want to know the source of the funds. Is it lawful? That is a purchase from the startup entity of equity, convertible debt, or other security convertible into its equity, commonly used in financing. So again, you're really looking at like, again, mentally the Silicon Valley sort of startup culture of like a VC fund coming in, right? And, investing in the company to get sort of equity, convertible debt, or security that's convertible to equity, right? Investments made by the entrepreneur, the individual applying, or his parent, spouse, sibling, or child do not qualify, right? So unlike the E, right, with the investor visas, right, if you're applying for investor visas, it's because it's a company you own in which you've invested. Here, it's the exact opposite, right? Investments from the actual applicant do not count, or their family. So who is a qualified investor? Well, it's defined as a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, right? So the U.S. persons, or an organization located in the U.S. that operates through a legal entity organized under U.S. law that is majority owned and controlled by U.S. citizens or residents. So obviously, this kind of precludes foreign investment in the U.S. company. The investor within the past 5 years must have made investments in startup entities in exchange for equity or convertible debt in at least 3 separate calendar years, totaling no less than $600,000. And subsequent to such investment, at least 2 such entities each created at least 5 qualified jobs or generated at least 500,000 in revenue with an average annualized revenue growth of at least 20%. So basically, well-established VCs or VC funds that have a track record or history of doing this, right? So basically, if it's like a newly created VC fund, it may not work unless maybe the people who are managing or running it, they themselves individually have a track record that they can fall back on, right? Because you're looking at $600,000, right, in the last 3 years, and they've created at least 5 jobs. 2 of the entities have created at least 5 jobs or generated 500,000 in revenue. So again, the investors have to have a track record. Says that to create at least 5 qualified jobs. So what's a qualified job, right? That's full-time employment, meaning at least 35 hours, located in the United States, that has been filled for at least 1 year by a U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident, or other immigrant lawfully authorized to be employed in the United States, right? Who is not an independent contractor or an entrepreneur of the startup, right? So if you're looking at the job creation, right, they got to be legally authorized to work in the U.S., and it does not count the actual entrepreneur or any family members, right? Again, this all goes back to who's investing in the company, right, in terms of qualifying the investors under this. What is a qualified government award or grant? An award or grant for economic development, research and development, or job creation made by a federal, state, or local entity that regularly provides such awards or grants to startup entities. Contractual commitments for goods and services are excluded, as are grants or awards from foreign entities. I mean, one of the big kickers here is that regularly provides such awards, right? So it can't be just like, oh, I don't know, the city mayor's office gave you some money. It's like, well, no, like, is there an economic development office? Maybe we should go through that because they regularly award money. Like, so a lot of the focus here is going to be on who's invested, right? On the individual, it's like, do you have ownership? Are you going to play a central role, right? And then the shift focuses to the investment, and a lot of the focus is on the actual investors themselves, right? Being very specific here. So how do we apply for this? Because like we said, it's not a sorry. The amounts, important thing. What are the actual amounts that have to be invested in the company? Really important thing to not overlook, because we talked about sort of what are the sort of requirements of the actual investors in terms of what they've invested in the past, but what do they actually have to invest into this company for it to qualify? Important information. Okay, sorry. That the company's received within 18 months preceding the filing of the application a qualified investment of at least $250,000 from one or more qualified investors, or within 18 months preceding the filing of the application, at least $100,000 through one or more qualified government awards or grants, right? So 250 in the last 18 months from the qualified investors, or $100,000 in the last 18 months from if it's like a government grant or award. Okay, now we can move on to the process after almost forgetting one of the key components. So how do you apply? Well, the entrepreneur files form I-941 application for entrepreneur parole. Where does it go? Well, obviously, when you go to the USCIS website, it shows you where to file. In this case, it's a Texas address because it goes to the Texas Service Center. And there, again, always look. There's one address that if you use the U.S. Postal Service, and there's another address that you use if you use FedEx or DHL or UPS. Just make sure you pay very close attention to the right address, or they will send it back. What's the filing fee? The filing fee is $1,200. And there's also a biometrics fee of $85. So obviously, if you're in the U.S., you will have to do biometrics here. If you're outside the U.S., you'll do biometrics outside the U.S. Now, who's included? Well, this 941 only includes the actual entrepreneur. The family has to apply separately. We'll talk about that a little bit later. How long is the initial approval good for? 30 months. So you're talking about, having to have that 10% the time you apply. So the approval is good for 30 months. 30 months later, it could be that your ownership's diminished, but it still needs to be about 5% on the reapplication. Now, here's the other thing. Since it's not a status, right? Remember, like, let's say if I'm in the U.S. as like a student and I file a change of status to H, right? Well, I'm here as a student. My status changes to 8. I'm good to go. This is not a status. So it doesn't matter if I'm outside the U.S. or if I'm inside the U.S. Once I get the approval, I still actually have to go out and then come back in, right? I can't file a change of status because it's not a status. In most cases, once the I-941 is approved, you'll leave to apply for travel documentation, which is referred to as a boarding foil, right? So basically, you schedule a visa appointment at the embassy or consulate. You show up, you show them your I-941 approval, right? They give you the boarding foil, and then you're able to then come back, right? So then when you're coming back, you go through Customs and Border Protection. So CBP, those are the guys at the airport or the land border, right? You show them your I-941, you show them your boarding foil, and then they should let you in. Now, always remember that CBP has a lot of authority, right? And so they can fully sort of re-investigate or look into or question this. They're not just going to accept on blind faith that everything was on the up and up. So when you go to the State Department, when you go to apply for the boarding foil at the embassy, you're probably going to have a copy of the application with you just in case. And then when you go through CBP, you're probably going to want to have a copy of the application with you just in case they give you any issues. Now, here's the kind of the kicker. Even though the approval is for 30 months, CBP might not enter you for 30 months. They might only enter you for 12 months. They love to do this, and it's annoying. And what do you do in that case? Well, it means you stay for 12 months, and then you eventually go out, right? And then come back in and apply for another 12 months. So just be forewarned, it's highly unlikely that CBP will give you everything, give you the full 30 months when you try to come in. Just remember, Canadians are visa exempt. So if you're Canadian, right, you just get the I-941 approval and then you just come through CBP, right? You don't have to go to the embassy or consulate. You can skip that step. If you are from a visa exempt country like Canada. Family. How do the family apply? Well, the family actually submit a completely different application. It is the form I-131 application for travel document to request parole to accompany or join the entrepreneur. So form I-131. So this includes spouses and any unmarried children under the age of 21 can also apply. Where do they apply? Well, they also apply at the Texas Service Center. How much? Well, the filing fee is $575. And this is per person. You have to submit an I-131 for each family member. So if there's a spouse and 3 kids, you got to submit 4 applications and pay $575 4 times. There's also a biometrics fee of $85 per person. But the biometrics fee only applies to applicants 14 to 79, right? So any children under the age of 14 don't have to pay the biometrics fee. The I-131 may be filed concurrently or at the same time as the 941 for the principal applicant, or it may be filed at a later date. So maybe they filed the I-941, got it approved, and then the family filed theirs later. Obviously, in that case, you would just want to include evidence, of the prior I-941 approval from the principal. Can family work? The answer is yes. Spouses can work, but they have to apply for authorization, and they can't apply until after they've entered the United States, right? So you submit your parole application. So let's say you submit your I-131, I-941, you submit it all together. It gets approved, and then you all go together to the embassy to apply for your document there, and then you turn around, you come to the United States, you go through CBP, they grant you a year. Then at that point, the spouse can submit a form I-765 to apply for work authorization. It's kind of annoying, right? Because it's like, well, they've only given me a year, and I got to like submit this other application in order to work, but that application could take 6 months, and so you know I can only work for half the time that I'm allowed to be here. Well, unfortunately, that's the way our system currently works. Um, Obviously, the family, like the principal, can reapply, right? So the initial application, the initial approval is 30 months. They can reapply for another approval. Um, One of the other things you're going to run into again is that since this is not an actual status, if you decide you want to apply for residency, let's say as an EB1A, person of extraordinary ability, or as an EB2 national interest waiver, we have full videos on those, right? You may be forced to consular process, right? So when you file for residency, you file the I-140, right? And then when that's approved, it gets kicked over to the National Visa Center in the Department of State for you to then get set up for a visa interview. So you'd have to leave the country, do your interview, then come back as a resident, right? You won't be able to adjust status in the United States because in order to adjust status in the United States, you have to be in a status, and parole is not a status, right? So you can go through the residency process. You'll just have to have your final step, your actual green card interview done at a U.S. embassy or consulate abroad. So, it can be something that gets you here and then, you know, does convert into you being able to apply for residency. Um, just wanted to kind of go over maybe some of the documentary requirements, like some of the things that you may want to include in submitting a case, right? So obviously, evidence of the capital investments. So you're going to show like bank statements, wire transfers, right? And you're also going to want to have all of the appropriate documentation, right, showing that they've they have this equity or whatever the debt instrument is to show that that they have invested in what they got in sort of return for their investment, right? Obviously, if it's through a government entity, you're going to want to get letters or some type of documentation from the government entities. Um, Also, you can include like newspaper articles or other similar evidence about you, about the company, about the actual investment, right? You'll uh, if you've actually been involved with the startup accelerator, right? That's obviously key evidence, right? So think like a Y Combinator is one of the big ones, right? So if you evidence that you were accepted into or participated or graduated from some type of startup accelerator is going to be helpful. Obviously, talked about revenue generation and growth, right? Because they want to see that significant potential. So there's like you can have a business plan, but also if you've actually had any revenue or growth, right, you want to be able to document that through tax returns, financial statements and the like. Obviously, if your idea is something that's based on like a patent, you're going to want to show evidence related to that. Um, Obviously evidence that you've played an active role. So obviously you can look at some of the company documents. If like in the minute of meeting or whatnot, you're designated as president, vice president, CEO, whatever it may be, or like employment verification letters, like documenting your exact position and role in the company. Um, we talked about obviously like job creation and whatnot. So, obviously looking at W-2s, 1099s, 941s, payroll documentation, anything documenting your employment and then the employment or the job creation for other people. Um, right. So this is all kind of the documentation that you want to include. And then one of the other details looking here. Okay. On re-parole. So we talked about what the initial investment amount was, right? That it was $250,000 um, over the last 18 months, but that you can apply to extend. So it was 10% ownership, $250,000 invested by qualified investors. And then when you re-parole, that ownership can reduce to 10%. Um, But the amount you have to show that's been invested actually goes up on the re-parole, right? So it says received at least $500,000 in qualified investments, qualified government grants or rewards, or a combination of such, created at least 5 qualified jobs with the startup entity during the initial parole period, or reached at least 500,000 in revenue and averaged 20% annual growth during the initial parole period, right? So there's 2 ways to look at it. I got additional investment, right? So it went from 250 to 500,000, and we've created 5 qualified jobs. Remember, those are full time for people that are authorized to work in the United States. Or reach 500,000 in revenue and average 20% annual growth, right, during that 30-month period. So that's an or statement. So they're looking at investment in jobs or income and growth to justify the reapplication. So like with an investor visa, right, your initial investment is your initial investment, and you can renew for 20, 30 years and your initial investment stayed the same, right? And they just want to make sure that you continue to be real and operating, right? And real and operating just shows you continue to operate. There doesn't have to be like a net increase, right? Here, they're very specific about no, you either have to show ongoing investments or you have to be able to show this, 20% annual increase to keep going. And so I hope this has been a useful video about a somewhat not so well known category that doesn't get used a whole lot. But if you are specifically someone who is looking for, US based venture capital or something similar in order to, fund your startup in the United States, the IEP rule may very well work for you and your family. Obviously, it's kind of a weird category. So if you're from an e-treaty company, we would probably kind of go that way, or look for some other alternatives first. But this is an option for the people that qualify. So, like always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, right, look us up on the social media, right? We try to answer a lot of the YouTube comments that we get and questions. Obviously, you can go to our website at keyvisa.com and schedule a consultation. Obviously, if for employment or anything immigration related, we have attorneys that handle everything from deportation, litigation, family, you name it, we can do it. Also, as always, download our app, Law Pilot Guardian, available for Android and iOS. There's a lot of information, useful information there for free, and we're adding new features all the time. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out all of our videos, right? You can probably find one on every different type of visa category or employment-based residency category. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you later.